Look down at the wooden floor under your feet, you think it's anonymous. It isn't. Every board remembers where its tree grew, which saw cut it, and whose hands nailed it down. Nobody believed that mattered until one quiet man read a piece of scrap lumber like a diary. What he found in the grain sent a man to the electric chair. Here's how. March 1932, a cold night in New Jersey, in the home of the most famous man alive. Charles Lindbergh had crossed the Atlantic alone, and the whole world knew his name by heart. Upstairs, his 20-month-old son slept in a second-floor nursery, tucked in for the night. Around 10 o'clock, the nurse checked the crib. It was empty. The baby was gone. On the windowsill sat a ransom note demanding $50,000 in careful, misspelled handwriting. And leaning against the house outside, sunk in the mud, someone had left a homemade wooden ladder. The ladder was crude, built in 3 sections that fit together to reach the nursery window. Under the weight of a climb it had split. You could still see where it cracked. Police dusted it, photographed it, and found nothing. No fingerprints, no name, no obvious lead. It was just wood, scrap, hammered together by hands that left no signature. A dead end. The investigation exploded. Thousands of tips, ransom drops, a nation holding its breath for weeks. Then, 10 weeks later, the worst news. The baby's body was found in woods nearby. Now, it was murder. And the biggest manhunt in American history had almost nothing to go on. The ransom money finally bought them a suspect 2 years later, but they needed to prove it. A German immigrant carpenter named Bruno Hauptmann had passed a marked gold certificate at a gas station. He had ransom cash hidden in his garage, but he swore he was innocent, and juries need proof. The money put him near the crime. It didn't put his hands on that ladder. And here's the part everyone had forgotten. The ladder had sat in evidence the whole time, ignored. Because who could pull a confession out of a pile of splintered lumber? One man thought he could. His name was Arthur Koehler, and his title didn't exist yet. He called himself a wood technologist. The newspapers would soon call him the Wood Detective. Koehler worked at a government forest lab in Wisconsin, studying how timber grows, dries, and breaks. He'd spent his whole life doing something most of us never do, actually looking at wood. Not glancing at it, reading it, the way you'd know a friend's handwriting from across a room. To him, a plank wasn't blank. It was a paragraph, and he could name the author. When he heard about the Lindbergh ladder, he wrote the police and asked to examine it. They shipped it to him, in pieces, and Koehler did what almost nobody else would think to. He didn't hunt for fingerprints. He looked at the wood itself, plank by plank, as evidence. First, he identified every species: North Carolina pine, Douglas fir, birch, all mixed together. Each board told him where that kind of tree grows and how far it must have traveled. Then he studied the surfaces under a microscope, hunting for the marks left by cutting machines. Here's the part that changes everything, so stay with me. Every planing machine leaves a fingerprint. As lumber gets smoothed, spinning blades cut tiny ridges into the surface, too fine to see. The spacing of those ridges depends on the exact machine and how fast the wood was fed. Koehler measured them. On one rail, he counted the marks and worked out the cutter's speed. 8 blades, turning at a specific rate, feeding wood at a specific pace, a mechanical signature. Now think about what that means. He was describing a machine he had never once seen. Somewhere in America stood a planer that had touched this wood. He was going to find it. So Koehler wrote every planing mill that could have made that pattern, over 1,000 of them. He asked each one for samples and machine details. Slowly, over months, the letters came back. Most were wrong, but one mill in South Carolina matched. The same ridges, the same defect. A tiny nick in one of their blades left an identical flaw in the ladder's wood. He'd traced a plank across half a country to one mill, from ridges he measured by hand. From there, he followed the shipments, where that mill sent its lumber, carload by carload. The trail pointed to a lumber yard in the Bronx, in New York City, near the crime. And that yard, it turned out, sat close to where the suspect Hauptmann lived and worked. Take a breath, because if that just impressed you, you're going to want the rest of this. This is exactly the kind of story this channel exists for: small, patient details that crack cases open. If that's your thing, subscribe and stick around, because Koehler wasn't finished, not even close. He tied the ladder's wood to Hauptmann's neighborhood. But a neighborhood isn't a single person. The defense could still say plenty of people bought lumber there, prove it was him. So Koehler turned to one particular board in the ladder, a rail he labeled Rail 16. It didn't match the fresh lumber. It was older, worn, with paint on one edge and nail holes. 4 square nail holes in an odd pattern, as if it had been fastened somewhere before. This board hadn't come from a store, it had been pried out of something and reused. When police searched Hauptmann's attic, Koehler asked to climb up and look at the floor. And there it was, a gap. One floorboard had been sawn short and removed from the attic. The empty joist still had nails sticking up, exposed where the missing board used to sit. Koehler laid rail 16 down against that gap in the attic floor. Watch what happens next. The grain of the ladder rail flowed straight into the grain of the board still nailed down. They had once been a single plank cut apart, one half climbing into the nursery. But grain alone can fool you. So Koehler went to the nail holes, and this is the clincher. The 4 square holes in rail 16 lined up exactly with the 4 nails in the joist. Same spacing, same angle, same odd pattern, like sliding a key back into its own lock. He drove nails through the holes and down into the joist marks. They slid in perfectly. There was only one explanation. Hauptmann had walked into his own attic and torn up his floor. He'd sawn off a length of his own floorboard to finish building the kidnap ladder. The wood didn't just come from his neighborhood anymore. It came from inside his house. Think how careful you'd be covering your tracks, and he'd left the other half nailed down. The board he stole and the board he left behind were, grain for grain, the same tree. At trial, Koehler became the first person ever allowed to testify as a wood expert in an American court. The defense fought it hard. Wood identification, they argued, wasn't real science. It was a guess. The judge disagreed. He let the quiet man from the forest lab take the stand. Koehler brought the ladder into the courtroom and, board by board, walked the jury through the wood. The species, the mill, the planer's ridges, the shipment to the Bronx, the rail from the attic. He showed them the nail holes lining up and let the wood say what a witness couldn't. It was slow, technical, and utterly devastating. The lumber placed the ladder in Hauptmann's own hands. The jury found him guilty. In 1936, Bruno Hauptmann was executed for the Lindbergh kidnapping. He maintained his innocence to the very end, and people still argue about the verdict today. But almost no one argues about the wood. The ladder analysis is considered the case's strongest evidence, and it came from a man who did nothing more than look at what everyone else ignored. Here's what I keep coming back to. The ladder was in evidence from the very first night. Every investigator saw it. They saw scrap wood. Koehler saw an address, a receipt, a confession. The difference wasn't a lab or a machine. It was a habit, refusing to call anything anonymous. He assumed the wood knew something, and he was patient enough to spend years asking it. That's the real lesson, and it's bigger than one case. The evidence is usually already there. The break rarely comes from a dramatic new clue. It comes from someone rereading the old one. Next time you're stuck, don't hunt for the missing piece. Look harder at the boring piece. The plank you walk past 100 times is often the one holding the whole answer. Koehler founded a field on that idea, forensic wood science, still used in courtrooms now. Every time smuggled timber is traced or a wooden weapon is matched, it traces back to this ladder. One self-taught man, one splintered ladder, one floorboard, and a science that outlived them all. So, remember the wood detective. The truth was never missing. It was just waiting to be read. If a quiet mind reading grain and nail holes stays with you, this channel is where you belong. Next time, another case cracked by a detail everyone else stepped over, and the person who noticed. The Lindbergh baby deserves to be remembered. Like and subscribe so the next case isn't forgotten either.